Before we build and deploy our application, I want to spend some words on the Google API key we're using and also about MongoDB Atlas thereafter. So here I logged in with that Google account, which I used to create that Google API keys we're using on both the backend and the frontend. And I also made sure that I selected my project here, which we created earlier in the course. Now here under credentials, you will see your API key. And you see that API key I used in the frontend index.html file and in this util folder, the location.js file on the backend before. Now this key can be configured. If you click on it, you can configure where it can be used, so which apps can use it. Now here it is open to everyone, and maybe that is fine for you, but you should be aware of the fact that you can configure it. You can, for example, control which applications running on which HTTP referrers or IP addresses can use this key. And if your key is getting used on any other location, so on any other server, it won't be able to communicate with this Google service. And that might be something you want to do to lock down your key to the IP address your app is getting hosted on in the end. Now, since we're using the key both on the front end as well as the back end, if you're hosting your two applications, front end and back end, on two different servers, which is something you could do, you want to add all IP addresses of both the front end and the back end server. Otherwise, if everything is getting served from one single server, adding that IP address is the right thing. Or you add the HTTP referrers here. So there you enter the URLs on which your front end and back end will be hosted on. So that is something you could consider. I will pick none here, but it is something you definitely want to be aware of. You can also restrict your key down there. You can restrict your key regarding the APIs it can be used for. And in our example, we're really only using the geocoding API and then the maps JavaScript API. So you might not need the other APIs, and locking it down ensures that if someone else is somehow able to do something with your key you don't want, that at least it can't use it for any API. So that is something you could consider as well. So in general, just consider locking down your key to IP addresses, to domains, and or to specific services that can be used. Now maybe you also want to have two different keys, one which is really locked down and one which is relatively open because only you know it because you only use it in development and you never share it with someone else. Keep in mind that if your key is part of your frontend app, everyone can see it, so that already counts as sharing. But if you only use it locally for development, you could create a new API key which is relatively open, which you use during development, and a different key for production, which is locked down. And to simulate this, I will create a new API key here, which is getting generated. And now I could restrict this, but I will keep it open. But now I have two different keys here. And now let's say this is my development key, the first one. Well, then I can grab this and go back to my code and use this here in the front end for my React App Google API key, and also on the back end for my Google API key. And I can insert this here. And later I will show you how to use different environment variables for production, and then we could use this second locked down key. Now speaking of locking down, let's also have a look at MongoDB Atlas again. You learned how you can configure it, how you can control the database and network access, and I want to come back to that. Of course, you could create a brand new cluster for your production project, or at least you create a new database in the collections here, which you use for production, which is what I will do here, MERN prod. And in there, I will add a places collection and thereafter also a users collection so that we have all these collections already prepared. So let me quickly do this here, users. But besides this setup, which absolutely makes sense, but besides this setup, you also might want to revisit your database and network access settings. You might want to consider creating a new user specifically for production because you want to give it different privileges or whatever you want. It's not something I will do here, but you could easily do that. And then since we manage our user on the back end here through environment variables, once you know how you can provide different values for development and for production, you can easily swap your credentials here, not in this file, but for these variables, to use different users for development and for production. Now for network access, you want to ensure that, of course, this MongoDB Atlas server is not just open to your local IP address, but that later, once we deployed our application to a real server, you add the IP address of that server here. Now we'll come back to that once we did deploy our application. For now, we can ignore this. And with this, we're generally set. We added the environment variables. Now let's learn how we build our React application for production to optimize and minify the code to get as small code as possible, how we can provide different values for production, and how we can do the same for the backend.